It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Tuesday in February after the conclusion of the 2024 NFL season. We have a new Super Bowl champion. We're going to discuss on this podcast what we learned from the Super Bowl, what we learned from the 2024 season as a whole as it pertains to the Ravens and what they can take with them into 2025. But first, let's get a quick
Don't miss the 2025 CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament in Baltimore, February 25th to March 1st at CFG Bank Arena. Watch HBCU teams battle to be crowned champion. Check out the free fan fest and performances at the Baltimore Convention Center. Enjoy downtown's top restaurants and stay in one of our amazing hotels. The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament. You want to be here.
All right, Jonas, it's time for our Who's Got It Better Than award. By the way, we didn't hand it out last week. I meant to. It was supposed to go to Chuck Pagano, who rejoined the Ravens organization. I got spring training on the mind, Jonas. I'm leaving tomorrow to go to Sarasota. Sorry, I'll try to keep my football and baseball straight here, but rejoin the Ravens. Our Who's Got It Better Than award this week goes to the Philadelphia Eagles, who just won the Super Bowl, beating the Kansas City Chiefs, sparing America from a three-peat. And let me tell you, when the Ravens and Eagles met earlier this season, a lot of Ravens players said after that game that the Eagles were the best team that they faced all season. Eagles came away with a 24-19 win that was probably not as close as the score indicated there. But what lessons did you learn, Jonas, from watching the Super Bowl? You wrote about it on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months.
I don't know if I learned anything so much as just had lessons reinforced. Just turnovers matter. That's been the Ravens' bugaboo in the playoffs. You can't win games by losing turnover battles 3-0 like they did against Buffalo. You can't lose them like they did in the AFC Championship game last year. Just for whatever reason, the turnover creating Ravens that we've known on defense have just up and disappeared in the playoffs. And the ball protecting Ravens that Lamar has been a part of basically year after year has again disappeared in the playoffs. And for as well as the defense has played in years past, they didn't play well enough against Buffalo to make up for them not forcing a couple turnovers, or for the Ravens offense, giving the ball away as often as it did. So, even though fundamentals and taking care of the ball, it's all very cliche, it does matter. And turnovers are inherently random in a lot of ways, but the best quarterbacks find a way to, keep the ball out of harm's trouble. And the best defenses find a way to get your hand on the ball, whether it's punching it out or picking someone off. So I don't know if I have any other lessons for the Ravens besides just keep getting back to the playoffs, because eventually your luck is going to turn around if you have as many good guys in the secondary and if you have Lamar at quarterback. But other than that, it just, it's kind of mind-boggling just how well they do at protecting the ball and creating turnovers in the regular season with Lamar, and how unfortunate they are in their lack of production in the playoffs. And it just, I don't know what else to say besides maybe just some guys not being ready for the moment, or just having the worst luck in playoff history, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, those two turnovers in the Bills game by Lamar were easily the two worst turnovers he's had all year. The 4 turnovers he threw during the regular season, the 4 interceptions, I should say, during the regular season, I don't think any of those were Lamar's fault. The only one that you could say was maybe Lamar's fault was when Rashad Bateman stopped on and sat in a route over the middle of the field in the Steelers game that he didn't need to. But that was probably on Rashad. That was probably not on Lamar Jackson. The other 3 were either balls that hit his receivers in the hands or balls that were wrestled away from his receivers. And then in the worst possible timing, he throws a terrible interception in the first half against the Bills. And then he has just the ball slip out of his hands for a fumble that were just totally uncharacteristic, didn't make any sense. And it's just frustrating that those happened at that time. Another thing that I think you were right to mention, Jonas, in that article, the elite pass rush that we saw the Eagles put on display against the Chiefs. I mean, they really only rushed 4 the entire game. They barely blitzed, and yet they were able to get home. You were ringing that bell all season, saying that the Ravens pass rush needed to be better. And look, they played solidly. They were one of the upper tier pass rush in the NFL, but ultimately they weren't elite. They weren't dominant. And perhaps the Ravens would have had a better chance against the Bills had they been able to get in the backfield a little bit more than they were able to.
Yeah, they had a great sack rate, which I think you credit to the finishers that you have on this team, maybe the secondary as well for just holding up well enough to give these guys a chance to get home. But like I know people rag on Adafe Owe and some of the other guys in this pass rush for not being able to get quarterbacks down to the ground, but Kyle Van Noy didn't miss a whole lot of opportunities. Nnamdi Madubuike didn't miss a whole lot of opportunities. The cornerbacks when they came didn't really miss a whole lot of opportunities. So I would expect that, if you played out that season 100 times, the sacks probably wouldn't have been in like the 98th percentile of the way that they were. I mean, they finished second in the league overall behind only the Broncos, who had a much more better, much more consistent pass rush. Because like the most predictive thing for pass rush production is your pressure rate. It's just as simple as that's borne out by, all kinds of data, all kinds of studies, all kinds of analytical, research. So the Ravens can still have a really good pass rush just by virtue of the sacks that they've recorded over the years and over this past season. But you need some more difference makers up front to have a group that can do the kind of things that Philly did. I mean, they didn't have to blitz once. Just that's unbelievable. And they didn't really have a true game wrecker aside from Jalen Carter, and even he had like I think 5.5 sacks this season, which is obviously I think 1.5 or 2.5 shy of Nnamdi. But you need guys who draw double teams, and I think the Eagles had that with Jalen Carter. They had that with Milton Williams. That they probably had that with Josh Sweat, for certain parts of his career. And I just don't know if Adafe's at that point. We know Nnamdi is because he just got double teamed more than about any interior lineman in the NFL. But that's why if someone like Mike Green, the really, really good edge rusher out of Marshall is there for the Ravens late in the first round, I think it's probably a pick where even if there is like a tackle that you really like who's still out there on the board, you probably have to run that card in just because it's so hard to find elite pass rushers after the second round, whereas the Ravens were able to find a really, really good tackle in the second round and Roger Rosengarten at the back of the second round at that.
Yeah, you're already teasing your mock draft, which I love, even though we're 2 months away from the NFL draft.
I don't think Mike Green's going to make it to 27. I think Dane Brugler of the Athletic had him as his like number 12 overall prospect. That's
The fact
of what the NFL front offices think.
But the fact that you were thinking about that, Jonas, is why you're the GOAT. I think your dog in the background barking was saying the Ravens need more dogs along the defensive line, is what he was saying. I mean, look, it's not just the fact that pressure rate leads to sacks. It's the fact that pressure rate leads to quarterback hurries. And in a lot of instances, look at the interception that Patrick Mahomes threw in the Super Bowl to Zach Bond, where he was backed up against his own end zone. He didn't get sacked, but he got hit enough that the ball was affected, and that he ended up throwing kind of a lame duck over the middle of the field that was picked off. So it's not just a sack total thing. It's making the quarterback feel uncomfortable. Mahomes felt uncomfortable the whole time. He got sacked 6 times and just had his eyes down for most of the game, had to take off and scramble more than he would have wanted to. So that's what the Ravens needed to do more to Josh Allen in the playoff game. And perhaps if they had a few more guys along that defensive line or rushing the passer, they might have been able to accomplish that. All right, our word of the day, Jonas, today is
you had a trend yourself.
One minor thing that I thought was that we could learn from the Super Bowl champions is trading up in the draft. Because remember when the Ravens selected Nate Wiggins in the first round of the 2024 NFL draft, and Eric DeCosta was asked if he had considered trading up at any point when he was watching all those tackles come off the board, and he said, quote, "That's not something we do." The teams had called him, and essentially he had, said no thank you, because the Ravens don't like to trade up unless it's for a quarterback, because all kinds of data shows that trading up in the NFL draft, unless you're trading up for a quarterback, usually doesn't work out. Well, guess what? The Eagles traded up for a bunch of guys. Howie Roseman has traded up for Cooper DeJean in the second round. He traded up for Devontae Smith in the first round. He traded up for Jalen Carter. He traded up for Jordan Davis, although probably would have been better served waiting and waiting for Kyle Hamilton, because Jordan Davis was picked 1 pick before Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton's a better player. However, trading up for a non-quarterback works if the guy is the right guy. You have to trust your own scouts, trust your own big board over everybody else's. It's not like it's a strategy you should abandon completely. If you believe that your big board is better than everybody else's, and you should as a GM, maybe consider trading up. To have kind of the philosophy that we're never going to trade up for a non-QB. Well, guess what? It just worked for a team that won the Super Bowl. So maybe the process isn't 100% correct.
And as a corollary to that, there's a nice story in the Wall Street Journal today about the Eagles and their much improved secondary, which was one of the NFL's worst last year, one of the NFL's best this year, if not the best. And obviously, the root of that, overall was who they found in the draft. It was Quinyon Mitchell in the first round, and then you said Cooper DeJean in the second. And I don't know if we've ever seen I'd have to go back and look at Eric DeCosta's drafting history, but we probably haven't seen like a true first, second round double dip at a certain position in Eric DeCosta's tenure, because you have so many positions on a team, you have so many needs at a position. And according to the Wall Street Journal, it was the first team to draft 2 corners that early in almost 20 years. So, 2 top 40 picks basically at the same position. And, this is a offseason where the Ravens are going to need to bolster their pass rush for the future, because Kyle Van Noy and Odafe Owe are both entering the final year of their deals. They're having to replace possibly the entire left side of that offensive line with Ronnie Stanley and Patrick McCary, both pending free agents. So if you feel really good about your board, as you said, Paul, and you like where you are, then don't be afraid to double dip. That there are worse things than taking just a sledgehammer to a position and just blowing it all up with draft picks. And are they going to be as absurdly productive as Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell were for Philly? Probably not. But if you're drafting them that high, then that tells you something about how highly you evaluate them, and what chances do you think they have of contributing, if not by week 1, then at least by week 18. So maybe that's something that we kind of toy around with in our head. Like, are there combinations of players, or are there scenarios where the Ravens could maybe double dip in the secondary, or in the pass rush, or offensive line, or I can't really think of any other positions of need that they could do what the Eagles did and replicate that strategy. But I think it certainly gives credence to the theory that there's no one best way to attack a draft, especially with the Ravens this close, to being a Super Bowl team.
Yeah, and the Ravens have 11 picks, projected to have 11 picks in this upcoming draft. I mean, they will have plenty of ammo if they want to double dip on positions, if they want to trade up for guys. Because if you're picking number 27, you are already picking behind 26 other teams that are going to have their pick of the litter, that are going to get players that are higher on the draft board than you are. And you are going to be picking 27th in every round, unless it's a compensatory round. So you are going to have to, the guys are going to slip through the cracks. Cooper DeJean was a guy who we thought the Ravens could take at number 27 or at number 30, I guess, at this time last year overall. And they ended up with Nate Wiggins, and that was a solid pick. But he ended up slipping into the teens in the second round. The Ravens could have, if they wanted to, trade up and get him. They ended up with Roger Rosengarten, fine. But my point being that if guys start to really slip, you have the ammo to go up and get these guys. Don't just have the philosophy that is so rigid that we're not trading up for a non-QB. Look back at what you've done. Look back at ways that you can improve and say, hey, maybe some guys are worth trading up for. All right. Can I get to our word of the day? Or you're going to cut me off again, Jonas? Okay. Word of the day is snub. And the definition, to treat with contempt or neglect. This is a perfect word for how I'm feeling about Jonas right now. The Middle English snibbin or snubbin, probably of Scandinavian origin, according to Merriam-Webster. The reason that we use snub in this instance, Jonas, is because Lamar Jackson was snubbed for MVP. Let's just put it as it is. I mean, we are a biased podcast, obviously. We watched Lamar Jackson a whole lot more than we watched Josh Allen. However, Lamar Jackson, by every statistical measure, had a better season than Josh Allen. The only categories that Josh Allen outperformed Lamar were rushing touchdowns and win-loss record. He had one more win, and he had several more rushing touchdowns. Lamar had a higher completion percentage, had more touchdowns, had more rushing yards, had more passing touchdowns, had fewer interceptions, and had the head-to-head regular season win. It's difficult for me to get that amped about this and that banging the table about this because we just saw Josh Allen beat Lamar in the playoffs. However, from a purely statistical standpoint, from a purely factual standpoint, Lamar Jackson should have won the MVP.
Yeah, I'm fine with people voting for Josh Allen. I just don't get the split voters. I just don't. It doesn't make sense. I know that
When you
like
say the split
there is
voters, you
a
mean the AP
yeah
vote, Lamar getting the AP first, all pro first team.
right. I just don't understand it because there's a world certainly in which you interpret most valuable as something different than best, which is I guess the assignation that you use for all pro. But to me, that's splitting hairs. Like in what world is most valuable player any different from all pro? You know, most valuable quarterback any different from first team all pro quarterback? Like you are deciding on that all pro thing based on who you thought was the best quarterback in the league. And the best quarterback in the league is the one who generates the most value for his team. And obviously, we thought that was Lamar. I'm fine with people saying that was Buffalo based on how this was supposed to be a transition year for them, based on how the fact they didn't really have a sure thing at quarterback, at wide receiver. But it just seems very dumb to make that kind of distinction just because you want to like give a treat to both guys when, as you said, Lamar had Josh in pretty much every category. I did take some objection to that like off-cited split, stat split that you saw on Twitter because it didn't include sacks, I think, which is where Josh Allen was really, really good. Eliminating those sacks. He also had way fewer fumbles than Lamar, which is obviously something that Lamar struggled with this year, including in that loss to Buffalo. But Lamar faced a tougher schedule. He had a historically good offense. He made so many guys into Pro Bowlers just by dint of his talent and his kind of gravitational pull. Derrick Henry, who we're about to talk about, had the best season of his career aside from the Offensive Player of the Year season in Tennessee because he was playing next to Lamar, not because he was playing behind some road grading offensive line. And, does Josh Allen have similar traits, similar abilities, similar kind of uplifting quality to him? Absolutely. He's a tremendous quarterback. I just think it's silly to consider everything that we saw that Lamar do, leading this team that had, the best yards per play since the greatest show on turf Rams, and consider that someone else was better than him. So hopefully that's the last time we're talking about it. Obviously, this whole issue is going to get relitigated when the Ravens play the Bills again in 2025 because they are on the schedule. And I think that game, is going to be in Buffalo, which makes it even more tasty. But the whole process of seeing Lamar win as decisively as he did in All Pro, and then see guys flip flop for that same voting, deadline because it was before the playoffs even started. It was just pretty mystifying to me.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much more because look, Lamar himself says he doesn't pay that much attention to those awards anyway. Ultimately, it doesn't matter a whole lot. We watched Lamar. We know he was better. He lost the playoff game to Josh Allen. You can't change the past. No MVP was going to change that. And quite frankly, if Lamar had won, I would have just hated would have had to turn off notifications on Twitter from all the Buffalo Bills fans getting into our notifications. So I'm glad I don't have to do that. Let's talk about Derrick Henry because you just teased him because he was on the red carpet and the Athletics' Diana Rossini talked to him on Thursday for the NFL honors. And he said, quote, "I love Baltimore. I want to finish my career in Baltimore," end quote. Now, Derrick Henry's only under contract for one more season. He signed that 2-year deal with the Ravens last offseason. He's coming off his best season as a pro. 325 carries, came close to the 2,000-yard rushing mark, 16 touchdowns, career high 5.9 yards per carry. We're going to talk about age. We talked about age when the Ravens signed him. And we said, I'm not going to pull a Jerry Coleman here and say how many more years, how much does he have left in the tank? But the question is, he is outperforming running backs of his age. And he had an incredible year where he looked like he was 22, not 30. He's going to be entering his age 31 season. Running back is a precarious position to play because that mileage does add up. Nobody takes better care of his body than Derrick Henry at that position. But would you explore a contract extension at this juncture, Jonas, or would you try to wait?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would. The issue that I run into is, he has that 12.9 million cap hit for 2025, which you would like to get down so that you could potentially bring back a Ronnie Stanley or a Patrick McCary, or be able to make some other splash in free agency. But because of what Derek just did in Baltimore, again, it's like a situation where I don't know how other teams would see his value if this were only a 1-year deal and he were coming off this year where it's 300 plus carries, almost 2,000 yards, 16 rushing touchdowns, career high 5.9 yards per carry. So everything that he did this past season was a testament to his own ability and his ability to stay in shape and be a guy who gets better over the course of the season, but is also a testament to Lamar and to Todd Monken and to the offensive line. And so I just don't know if this is a situation where you want to be paying for like the production that just came as opposed to the production that might still come. It's just he's an outlier in so many ways, and that makes me a little bit wary of what to do in a situation like this, because you don't want to pay. You want to pay this guy like you think he's going to what you think he's going to be worth, and what he just did this past year was proof that he was a first-year running back in the NFL. But the contract and the buzz that he got in free agency last year suggested that he was a second-tier running back, because he wasn't getting the kind of money that Saquon Barkley was. He wasn't getting, I think, the money that Josh Jacobs was. He outperformed everyone but Saquon, and he's running behind a worse offensive line. And so I just don't know how to kind of square what the rest of the NFL felt about his market versus what he means to the Ravens versus what he could mean to the Ravens in 2026, in 2027, considering he is just such a remarkable specimen. But at a certain point, everyone does hit that cliff. And I just don't know how to kind of wrap all that together in a way that's player friendly and team friendly and gets a potential extension across the finish line.
Well, it also depends on have enough GMs around the league changed their minds about the running back position from last year. Obviously, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, they all ink these big deals. They all have great years with their respective teams. And everybody's looking at that and saying these guys have revived the running back position, and they've gotten teams to change the way that they think about signing running backs and paying running backs as they get into their late 20s, into 30s. Have teams really taken that and added that to their philosophy that, hey, maybe it's okay now to pay these running backs? Or do they look at those three guys as an anomaly and say, those are three superior talents, those are three outstanding players, and it was great that those teams got production out of them, but that's not going to work for the average running back who's out there? I do wonder if teams have really changed their philosophy at that position, or if that was just kind of a lot of lip service being paid by teams that wanted to say, hey, good for those guys, good that they got paid, good for those teams, they got production out of those positions, but we're not going to change who we are as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the best comparison that I've heard for what a elite running back could be or should be is just the fuel for a fire. And I don't want to, I guess we're a little bit too close to the California fires to make a too on the nose comparison, but you can't have an inferno without a boatload of fuel, and the fuel that you need is the foundation for the offense. It's the offensive line. It's the play caller. It's the quarterback, obviously. And if you drop Derrick Henry onto the Bengals roster, I mean, obviously he would have done great because Joe Burrow is a very, very smart quarterback, and Zach Taylor's a good offensive mind and everything, but I don't think he goes for even 1,200, 1,300 yards behind that offensive line. And certainly next to Joe Burrow, coming off Lamar would definitely be a downgrade. So you are investing in Derrick Henry, I think, if you're sure, absolutely sure that like the next 2 years of this offensive line or next 3 years of this offensive line are at least as good as what they were this year. And it's probably an okay bet because, as we've talked about, as I'm sure we're going to talk about in the future, like having Lamar be as mobile as he is does help your offensive line, stay ahead of the sticks and kind of freeze linebackers in a way that very, very few quarterbacks can. But you don't want to be the GM who's paying, $10 million a year to a running back who can only be a little bit above league average because you neglected to pay your offensive line, or you got so little depth along the offensive line because of injuries here or there that you just can't, blow open holes for him. So
Yeah.
that's the bet that I think you have to consider as you wonder just how valuable Derrick Henry is versus, the hypothetical where you're maybe ditching him after next year, and looking to go in the draft and maybe using that like $10 million, $8 to $10 million in savings to go get, a kind of middling to good left guard, or using it to give someone extension that you otherwise wouldn't have that flexibility to do.
And it's not just offensive line. I think it's also other weapons on the offense. It's pass catchers, it's wide receivers and tight ends too. Because I think you look back at the Super Bowl run, and there's, I think what has hurt the running back market a lot coming into last offseason was the narrative that, a great running back doesn't get you over the hump. How many great running backs have won Super Bowls, and how many teams have won Super Bowls with mediocre to below average running backs? You don't have to invest that much at running back in order to win a Super Bowl. And you can't point to too many recent Super Bowls where these elite running backs have been playing and playing great. Look back at this past Super Bowl. Saquon Barkley had his worst game of the entire season. I mean, he averaged between 2 and 3 yards per carry. And if the Eagles didn't have those other weapons in A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith, they would have been screwed. I mean, they might have lost that game if they didn't have the number of weapons. So I think the reason that, that narrative has become a truism is because those teams that have elite running backs have invested so much into those elite running backs that they have robbed Peter to pay Paul. And so they then don't have the elite talent on the outside. They don't have the elite wide receivers and elite playmakers at tight end. So if the Ravens were to spend lavishly on a contract extension for Derrick Henry, and that maybe prevents them from re-signing somebody like Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely, who have become huge targets for Lamar Jackson, massively help this passing game, that could really hurt their offense, because then they get into a playoff game and an opponent does what the Chiefs do and they sell out against the run, and Derrick Henry is averaging 2.3 yards per carry. And because the Ravens don't have the weapons on the outside, they are not able to move the ball as effectively. I mean, we saw at the end of the Bills game, Zay Flowers was out. Rashad Bateman had to miss a few snaps there. And Tylan Wallace was getting catches. Anthony Weaver, all these guys were getting touches that should not have been getting touches down the stretch. So it's a very fraught conversation, because I do think Derrick Henry has shown that he deserves to have his future, not in doubt. He deserves to be paid handsomely for what he has contributed to the Titans for years and what he just contributed to the Ravens. And he is proof that, running backs don't necessarily have to fall off a cliff once they hit 28, 29, 30. However, it's a business, and the Ravens have to be very careful as to how they allocate their money. You can't just pay for past production. This isn't like baseball where you can just, pay a guy an 11-year deal and say, we'll worry about the back end of that contract later. They have to worry about that because the salary cap will come knocking at some point. So this is a conversation I'm sure we'll have spent a lot more time over the coming weeks and months and maybe years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird situation because in Baltimore, he can be a 4-down back, by which I mean, you get 5 yards on first down, you can get 3 yards on second down. Maybe you're stopped on third down, but hey, guess what? It's 4th and 1, and you have Derrick Henry in your backfield. You can hand it to him. But if the Ravens passing game is out of whack, or if the line is busted, there's a world in which Derrick Henry is only like a early down back for this Ravens offense. And that's partly because he's not as good a pass blocker as someone like Justice Hill, but it's also because he's not, a great receiver in terms of just his movement skills out. He's not a great route runner. And are you again going to be paying top of the market money to a guy like Derrick Henry, who's not as gifted a receiver as someone like Saquon Barkley or Christian McCaffrey or even like Josh Jacobs? That would kind of be a tough pill to swallow. So for as incredible as he is as a runner, and this year proved it, the analytics show it, the raw stats show it, the film shows it, the highlights show it, there are still some obvious limitations to Derrick Henry's game that maybe would get in the way of, him or his agent getting paid the kind of money that he thinks he's worth.
All right, let's dive into our lessons from the 2024 season, Jonas. We've already gone 30 minutes on this podcast. It's time to give our 6 lessons from the Ravens 2024 season. Lessons for the coaching staff, lessons for the front office, lessons for the players, how they should attack this 2025 season should in part be influenced by what they learned from this past season. All right, Jonas, why don't you start us off? What's the first lesson you learned from the Ravens 2024 season?
Yeah, I mean, it's a story of the 2024 season in general for the Ravens, which is like with Lamar Jackson, all things are possible. I think you contrast it to Kansas City, where Patrick Mahomes is coming off probably the 2 worst seasons of his career. The success rate kind of, I guess, speaks for itself that they weren't that bad. They was able to stay ahead of the sticks and everything, but EPA per attempt, EPA per dropback, Mahomes has fallen off, whereas Lamar is only ascending. I mean, back-to-back MVP this year, obviously a lot better than last year, but the Ravens had the best offense in football in the regular season, first in passing efficiency, first in rushing efficiency. Lamar became just like a 99th percentile performer at so many different facets of this game. The Ravens have one of the best quick game offenses in the NFL. He also just completely unexpectedly turned into one of the best deep ball throwers, even though he didn't have a lot of traditional kind of 9 balls down the sideline. The Ravens became one of the best in screens. He wasn't throwing a whole lot to the receivers outside the numbers early in his career. Now he's more comfortable doing it, and he's also among the more efficient quarterbacks in the NFL throwing outside the numbers. Lamar was not a under center quarterback for the early parts of his career under Greg Roman. Now, in addition to being able to win from the shotgun formation, the pistol formation, he's become a really competent, really confident under center quarterback, which opens up, huge swaths of the Todd Monken playbook for the Ravens. We already knew that the Ravens were kind of well suited to win and dominate games, when they took the early lead and they can kind of really put their boot down on defense's necks. But we also saw this year several times Lamar be able to engineer comebacks, not least of which was the playoff game in Buffalo, where only a Mark Andrews drop, prevented them from being able to tie that game late. And then, as a just kind of pocket manager, Lamar was guilty, I think, early in his career of, even though we would have these incredible scrambles, he was not the most adept at avoiding pressures that would turn into sacks. And this year, I think he was like top 3, top 4 at, PFF's pressure to sack ratio. So the game was obviously slowing down for him. He acknowledged as much. He told us in December that he was, quote, getting a feel for what they're doing to me on defense, and that's just making my job a lot easier. So I really don't know what the next step is for him after a season this incredible. We mentioned the fumbles. That's been a problem, but he's going to have his quarterback's coach back. He's going to have his offensive coordinator back. He's going to have, pretty much all of his top weapons back on offense. And the challenge for him, as crazy as it sounds, is just to be as good as he was in 2024 or in 2025. And there's every reason to expect that to continue, but it's an awfully high bar because so much of what he did this year was so incredible and like to a certain extent, just so unexpected.
Yeah, just copy and paste. I mean, he was as incredible as he was in 2023. He got better in 2024. It's like like you said, eliminate fumbles, like throw 3 interceptions instead of 4. Like we're talking about the slightest of things to change. He was as close to perfect as you can get during the regular season. It's getting over the hump. I don't think that there's necessarily another step, another gear that he can take. Maybe if they can get a top tier wide receiver, if they can somehow scoop up another number 1 wide receiver to pair with him, that we can see him reach astronomical levels and throw like 50 touchdowns like Peyton Manning did a few years ago. But at some point, he is phenomenal. If he just does what he did this past year, or even is in the, does 90% of what he did this past year, he's going to have a phenomenal year. They're going to make the playoffs, and, he should be a candidate for MVP again. He was incredible. My second lesson that I learned, Jonas, my first lesson, our second lesson overall, for Eric DeCosta, get extensions done earlier rather than later. Now, the risk in doing this is that you are adding more money to your sooner payroll as opposed to your later payroll. So you are increasing the amount that you're paying these guys now. But we saw with Justin Madubuike, now Nnamdi Madubuike, when he was Justin Madubuike and signed his deal with the Ravens last offseason, the Ravens ended up having to pay him $98 million. If they had signed him a year earlier, and by all reports, they did make that an attempt, Nnamdi Madubuike bet on himself. He went out and had a career year in 2023, and he cashed in with a $98 million deal. He had 6.5 sacks this year. He was good. He wasn't all pro level, but he had a solid year this year. You don't want to be paying these $100 million contracts to 4 or 5 different players. And the Ravens are in a situation right now, as Gianna Hahn wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, about how it's really 5 or 6 players that are taking up a huge, huge portion of their salary cap going forward. It's Marlon Humphrey, it's Lamar Jackson, it's Roquan Smith, it's Nnamdi Madubuike. These guys are getting a huge amount of money, and it's having to make Eric DeCosta scrounge around to fill out the rest of the roster. This is important now as we look ahead, because Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum are now eligible for extensions. Those guys are going to be worth a lot of money. Kyle Hamilton is going to be worth heaps and gobs, and Tyler Linderbaum shouldn't be that far behind him in terms of earnings. So they are going to have to get deals done with them at some point. And I think the sooner that they get those deals done, the better off they will be in the long term. Now, the counterpoint to that is Brandon Stephens, because at this time last year, Brandon Stephens was coming off an awesome 2023 season, legit outside corner. You're saying the Ravens have only 1 year left on Brandon Stephens' contract. They got to extend him now and make sure that he doesn't hit free agency. Well, now he's heading into free agency, and he unfortunately has lost himself a lot of money with the 2024 season that he just had. And I'd be frankly surprised if the Ravens bring him back for any kind of multi-year contract, or if they bring him back at all. So it can go poorly if the guy that you are handing a big contract extension to does not live up to that. But if you're betting on the right guys, and in my mind, I think nobody better that you could bet on than Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum, I think that those kind of deals should work out.
Yeah, I mean, the Brandon Stephens point is fascinating, because at this point last year, or I guess in the offseason last year, like, there were people who were very convicted in their belief that the Ravens should make Brandon Stephens CB1 and do what they could to part ways with Marlon Humphrey. And one disaster season from B. Steve, and one Pro Bowl level season from Marlon Humphrey. We're kind of back to the status quo of where we were, of Marlon Humphrey being clearly the best cornerback on this roster, and Brandon Stephens being the guy who was a project coming out of college, and now still seems like a bit of a project at the NFL level. So you look at what the Eagles have done, and that is there are a lot of similarities between what Howie Roseman tries to do and what Eric DeCosta tries to do with their rosters. But you just look at the cap hits for that Eagles roster, and so many of the guys have lower than expected cap hits for 2024 and even 2025. And that's because, Howie, for one, signs these guys as early as possible to, near top of the market deals. And for the most part, kind of, backdate some of the cap hits so that they can have space to work with while, the going is good. And obviously, as we've seen with New Orleans, eventually you're going to have to kind of pay the piper. And the hope is that the guys that you sign for these long-term deals continue to generate surplus value based off those contracts. Because if they don't, and if you have guys who age out of their value pretty quickly or just get hurt, then you're obviously stuck with a pretty hefty price tag. But goes back to the importance of drafting. You don't want to be We saw even in Denver this past year just how astronomical their dead cap hit was, but they were still able to field a top 10 level team because they had some really, really good talent. They had some really good coaching, and they were able to find some winners among their recent draft picks that can lift that team up. So, I think it's obviously to the Ravens' advantage, and probably to Hamilton and Linderbaum's advantage if those deals get done as soon as possible, because you always want to, be able to get to that second contract as soon as possible and that third contract as soon as possible. Nothing that we've seen from Hamilton and Linderbaum suggests that they're going to fall off at any point soon. I guess you could maybe quibble a little bit with Kyle's, kind of minor injury history, but I think he does the work necessary to stay out of trouble. So it's going to be interesting to see what those deals are and just kind of how it affects the Ravens long term. But I agree with you that it's always to the Ravens' advantage to try to strike early, because the cap's only going up year after year, and when it does, then you give the opportunity for other teams to set the market for what top of the market position, salary caps top of the market salaries could look like, and you want to be the team that gets there first, because that $3 to $5 million in value from year to year could be the difference between you being able to find the help that you need to kind of take your team over the top.
Yeah, you mentioned the Eagles. Remember how Jalen Hurts signed his contract extension with the Eagles, and then not long after that, Lamar Jackson signed his extension. The Eagles set the bar, they set the market, and then the Ravens had to react and respond, and it was the Ravens that had to pay Lamar more. I know Lamar is a much better quarterback than Jalen Hurts, but the point being that the teams that set the market first often end up looking better in the long run because those contracts age out. All right, what's your next lesson that you learned, Jonas?
Lesson number 3. It's nothing we didn't already know, but just the AFC is a meat grinder. The Ravens were, by the end of the year, according to DVOA, the NFL's best team, and yet they finished with the AFC's 3rd seed, and they were not far off from not even winning the AFC North. So you look at what is ahead for them. You look at the early Super Bowl odds. The Chiefs and the Ravens, by one of the lists, were co-first place for Super Bowl favorites, but the Bills are 4th. The Bengals are 7th. The Chargers are 11th. The Texans are 12th. You have 6 of the NFL's most talented quarterbacks in that group. You got 3 MVPs with Lamar, Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, obviously got some MVP love this past year. And all of those teams, besides the Chiefs and Ravens, are one good offseason away from being potentially the AFC's best team. The Bills just need to find some more offensive help and stabilize that defense. The Bengals just need, a slight uptick in defensive efficiency. The Chargers just need to find, some skill talent for Justin Herbert. The Texans need to find a capable offensive line. And if any of those things happen, the Ravens will pretty quickly have some company for, along with the Chiefs, for being like best team in the conference good. So the Ravens are, they are in a pretty fancy, spiffy neighborhood when it comes to just what other teams, have kind of knocking on their door. The Chiefs have Spags talking defensively. The Bills have Sean McDermott. The Bengals just hired Al Golden, who was, did wonders in Notre Dame for that defense. The Chargers came out of nowhere with Jesse Minter, who's obviously a former Ravens guy, and a bunch of no-name pieces. The Texans have D'Amico Ryans. They had a top 3 defense by DVOA, even with a bunch of injuries. So there's not really a lot separating the Ravens from these other contenders in the AFC defensively. And the Ravens have another really, really tough schedule. They're going to get the Bengals twice. They're going to get the Steelers twice. The Patriots, not going to be a great team, we think, in 2025, but they have Drake May. They're going to place the Texans at home in 2025, the Bills on the road in 2025, the Dolphins, who knows what they could be. And obviously they're going to have the Chiefs on the road in Kansas City. So all this is to say, you just better take care of business in the regular season, because we saw that even though Kansas City wasn't probably the best team during the regular season in the AFC, they took care of business when they had to. And that meant that they only had to beat the Texans in that AFC divisional round to get to a situation where they were going to be hosting either the Ravens or the Bills. And that home field advantage was probably enough to take them to the Super Bowl, even though they'd obviously lost to the Bills in the regular season. And certainly the Ravens, by the end of the regular season, were probably a more well-rounded team. It just didn't matter because they hadn't taken care of business in weeks 1 to 18, and the Chiefs had, and that ultimately was enough to kind of carry them to the finish line, and get them to a position in the playoffs where they just would kind of make their own magic. And lo and behold, Patrick Mahomes did it again.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was thinking when I was watching that game is how did one of these other AFC juggernauts not knock off the Chiefs at some point before this? Like the Chiefs got to that game and they got pantsed. Like how would the Bills have fared in the Super Bowl? How would the Ravens have fared? Didn't matter because the Chiefs won enough regular season games to get the 1 seed, and they got the 1 seed, which meant that they didn't have to play in the first round. That meant that they had home field advantage when they played the Bills. That means they got to play the Texans to get there. Like it so much of the playoffs comes down to seeding, and it's unfortunate because I do think that the Bills or the Ravens would have given the Eagles a better game, but
Yeah.
the Chiefs just did enough during the regular season to get there, and they kept pulling these wins out of what and being able to get there. It was frustrating. All right, another lesson that I learned, Jonas, is, and this is a lesson that the Ravens themselves learned, and I think they learned it well. Don't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. The Ravens, especially on the defensive side, made several changes throughout the course of the regular season. On the personnel side, they moved Kyle Hamilton from this kind of freewheeling everywhere all at once safety to a pure deep safety. They went through a safety rotation next to him, going from Marcus Williams to Eddie Jackson, and then finally settling on Darius Washington. They came into the season thinking Trenton Simpson is the heir apparent for Patrick Queen, and by midseason they abandoned that and were going with a different rotation of guys next to Roquan Smith. Trenton Simpson, by the way, averaged 53 defensive snaps per game through the first 11 weeks, 13 defensive snaps through the final 5 weeks of the regular season. The Ravens, Zach Orr, John Harbaugh learned that if something isn't working, change. Do something different. And it might not always work. You're going to insert Eddie Jackson in place of Marcus Williams at first, and that is going to go just as poorly as Marcus Williams will. But ultimately, if you keep making changes, you'll settle on Darius Washington, who is a revelation for them this year. So to me, it's an important lesson to learn, and it can be a hard one for teams that have long tenured coordinators, head coaches. The Ravens were not in that position. Zach Orr was just getting his feet wet for the first time as a defensive coordinator. He and Harbaugh made the bold choices to move the veterans out of their spots, and it worked. And I think that that's an important lesson that the Ravens can take with them.
You could even apply it to what we saw with Brandon Stevens. Obviously he didn't really lose his starting job per se, but we saw that the Ravens certainly got fed up with him as an outside cornerback to a certain extent, that they were willing to bump him inside and let Trey White get some snaps as the outside corner. So, that I think probably said everything you need to know about just where they were with his lack of ball production and his inability to stay attached to these receivers, especially on some of those downfield routes. And it kind of goes to show maybe what Zach Orr had to learn about life on the job as a defense coordinator, as a shot caller in year one. We saw Mike Macdonald be able to be gifted Roquan Smith in year one at midseason, and that certainly fixed a lot of things for him. But I think this is obviously a learning experience for Zach Orr coming in and having to learn that you're going to have to make some tough decisions. You're going to have to, be able to, kill some of your darlings and sacrifice some things that maybe you thought were sure things for the betterment of the team. I mean, he had worked with Trenton Simpson as a rookie, as the linebackers coach, and for him to realize, midway through that this guy isn't getting the job done and we're going to have to make a change, probably was really, really tough for him. But he did what he had to, and the Ravens defense benefited from it in the long run. And obviously it was not a great look for Trenton Simpson that, he couldn't kind of enjoy the halo effect of Roquan Smith as easily as Patrick Queen did. But you just hope that the way it was handled behind the scenes was something that wasn't ultimately detrimental to his confidence and to his ability in this Ravens system, because he's still got 2 more years under contract, and that's plenty of time for him to, find the U-turn in the career that the Ravens need. So we'll see just, what it means for him, what it means for Darius Washington, what it means for Marcus Williams as he kind of heads into the great unknown with the Ravens all but certainly, going to being all but certainly expected to release him. But it's going to be really interesting to see, what kind of year two looks like for Zach Orr, because if it's any of the kind of career trajectory of Mike McDonald, then the Ravens are in a really, really good place and probably going to have to find someone else to replace him in 2026, because Zach Orr probably is going to be finding a head coaching job. But if you don't learn anything, or if the players don't learn anything from what they struggle with in year one in Zach Orr, then Ravens are going to expect even more changes after next year, or even during next year.
Yeah. All right. What's your next lesson, Jonas? Take a sip for your water. There you go.
Tim Robinson. This is something probably that applies to just team building in general, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about it with the draft, but just the importance of investing in outliers, aka pedigree matters. There's so much roster parity in the NFL. Like, there's not a whole lot separating the best roster in the NFL from the 32nd ranked roster in the NFL. So find something that makes your team different. Find something that makes your team difficult to prepare for. Lamar Jackson, obviously, being the most obvious example, a guy who was one of the fastest quarterbacks in the NFL and also had a pretty live arm coming out of Louisville. And there wasn't enough confidence in his accuracy or in his ability to improve. And the Ravens said, hey, we like that guy. Maybe not as much as Hayden Hurst, but we like that guy. And you see it in ways big and small on this team. Derrick Henry, not a lot of guys in NFL history have run as fast or as intimidatingly as him. The Ravens decided, hey, we like that guy at $8 million a year. Let's bring him to Baltimore. We like him, especially with the kind of synergy with Lamar Jackson. Let's see what that can do for us. And lo and behold, the Ravens get one of the NFL's best ever running games. Pat Ricard, again, a guy as a fullback should not be able to move that well at 300 pounds or be able to block, opposing edge rushers as well as he did. Let's get him for what we think is a discount. The Ravens did. And again, whenever he was on the field, the Ravens were typically a better offense. Kyle Hamilton, not a lot of guys have been able to move as well as he has at that safety position at his size. Not a lot of guys in the league, full stop, are as intelligent as he is. And I still think back to the feature story that I did in 2023, where he rattles off like the first 22 or so digits of pi just without any prompting. Just goes to show just how smart he is as a player. And even to a kind of lesser extent, Nate Wiggins, a very, very skinny dude, but he runs like the wind. And was he the best cornerback in the 2024 draft class, like the Ravens kind of said that they thought he was? Probably not, because Quinyon Mitchell exists, but still, all the physical ability and all of the dogged determination that the Ravens thought that they saw on that tape at Clemson showed up on this year's film with the Ravens. And you could also say that there were kind of less obvious example where the Ravens were just betting on traits. Travis Jones probably would have been a 90th percentile guy in the bench press if he'd done that at the combine. He was a huge, huge prospect. He's a huge, huge prospect still for the Ravens. And it turns out that he is very, very hard to uproot off the ball. Daniel Failele, one of the biggest players in the league, was obviously a tackle coming out of Minnesota. The Ravens tried him for a little bit. Didn't really go all that well. Put him inside where some of those weaknesses laterally would have been a little less exposed. And, obviously your mileage may vary with the Daniel Failele experiment, but he certainly developed into at least a competent guard in year 3. And who knows what year 4 could hold for him. Adafe Owe, physical freak, ran a sub 4.40. I think he's probably one of the most interesting guys on this Ravens roster, because I think that explosiveness is probably less obvious than his technical ability is. But again, they were still able to get a 10-sack season out of him. So you put all that together and you just kind of wonder what is next for the Ravens. And I think it marries well with the notion of like why, Derek DeCosta is reluctant to part with draft capital. And that's because if you are trading away these first round picks, then you're losing the opportunity to, have a bite at the apple at some of these guys who are physical outliers or, productive outliers. And you're trading that away for the chance to get guys who've maybe proven themselves, in free agency or in the draft. or just in real life production, but you kind of lose the ability to bring them into your system and to nurture them in a way where you can heighten that potential, like we've seen them do with Kyle Hamilton or Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson. Obviously, Derrick Henry was a guy that they traded for, but again, this is not an Eagles love fest. But what did the Eagles do with Mekhi Becton? They saw that this was a guy who had first round pedigree at a certain point, had not been able to succeed in New York as a tackle, but you bring him in, you bring him under Jeff Stoutland's teaching, and you turn him into a guy who is a pretty good guard and the last piece that you need to turn this offensive line again into another league best juggernaut by most measurements. So you just wonder, are the Ravens going to try to buy low on anyone else? Are there guys in free agency who the Ravens think kind of fit this planet theory of there are only so many guys who are built like him, only so many guys who can run like him? Can we bring him into our system and make him be another kind of outlier who teams just don't really have the kind of answers for because of how fast he can run or how big he is or how strong he is? And that's probably one of the more fun things that we did last year. I mean, I didn't think that the Ravens would be able to sign Derrick Henry because of just how impressive he was. But every other team around the NFL overestimated or underestimated what he could do. And the Ravens were able to take that opportunity and really make other teams pay for it.
Yeah, and when it comes to betting on traits for young guys, for guys in the draft or free agents that you think were underutilized elsewhere, you're also betting on your own player development system. You're betting on
Right.
your coaches, your trainers, everybody to get the most out of these guys. And like you said, for Travis Jones, there might be other teams, there might be other systems where he doesn't work as well. I mean, Ardarius Washington was counted out by everybody to the point where he was an undrafted free agent because of his size. And quite frankly, it took the Ravens 2 benchings to get to him and to realize, oh, this guy maybe is a starting caliber safety. I was one of the doubters of him because I realized he was 5'8", and I'm 5'8", and I can't play safety. I mean, you have to be able to have confidence in your staff to be able to get the most out of these guys. And for Nate Wiggins, it's, hey, yeah, he's not the heaviest guy, he's not the strongest guy, but we believe we can get the most out of him. And there are other organizations that would waste talent like that. I mean, I think Lamar would be good wherever he went, but his success story is a huge credit to the Ravens for being able to develop him into the quarterback that he is today, and Lamar being willing and eager to put in that work to develop himself. So the Ravens have a great player development system. As much as they can trust it, they should trust it. All right, my final lesson that I learned, Jonas, and this one is more a debate than it is. I'm opening the floodgates here. But the Ravens need to pay closer attention to keeping guys off the field whenever possible in order to keep them healthy. Because I look back at it was meaningful, but not as meaningful Week 18 game in the final game of the season against the Cleveland Browns, against the Bailey Zappi / Dorian Thompson Robinson led Cleveland Browns. Zay Flowers gets hurt in that game. He is unavailable for their 2 playoff games, including their playoff loss against the Buffalo Bills. Had he been on the field, would the Ravens have beaten the Bills? Who's to say? It's impossible to know. But I think they would have had a better chance than having to throw to Tylan Wallace as many times as they did and Anthony Miller as many times as they did. The Ravens in 2025, it would behoove them, I think, to give Lamar as much rest as possible, give their key skill position players as much rest as possible, give their offensive linemen as much rest as possible. I think the Ravens had to win that Week 18 game in order to win the division. We just talked about how important seeding is in the playoffs. But the Steelers ended up losing later that night. And that game, the Ravens' win over the Browns didn't end up mattering because the Ravens won the division by 2 games. I'm not saying they were wrong to play their starters against the Browns, but just be a little bit more careful. I mean, especially as you're getting down towards the end of the season. I mean, I don't know what they could have done differently. That's something that they probably need to examine themselves. But Jonas, do you think that the Ravens should have been more careful in that Week 18 game?
I don't know. like we are, everything's easier in hindsight. You know,
Oh,
if you're
absolutely.
asking
That's
if
all
you're
we're
asking
doing on
less
this
of,
show. We're just
if
looking
you're
back
asking
and
less,
saying we have the answers to the
I
test.
know. If you're asking less of Zay Flowers, and maybe you're asking more of Ronnie Stanley, or maybe you're asking more of Lamar Jackson, and um, it's, you know, it's a contact sport, and the Ravens, I think, for the most part, did a really, really good job just program wide of, putting their guys in positions to stay healthy. I mean, obviously, I think the big lesson from this is that Jonas is a jinx, because not
Correct.
5 days after I wrote the story that the Ravens were the healthiest team in the NFL, then Zay Flowers gets hurt. But they were in a position where it didn't really matter, because they still were able to blow the Steelers' doors off a couple weeks, or a week later in the wild card round, and they were still able to move the ball extremely well against the Bills in that divisional round, despite everything else. So I don't know. It's Health is the most important thing. I just don't know. I mean, like, if you're putting Rashad Bateman out there for every snap, then people still feel very, very strongly about Rashad Bateman. I mean, there are corners of Ravens Twitter that think that he is wide receiver one for the Ravens. And if you're putting him out there with his injury history and expecting him to win, against the Browns in a physical game, and it's just a tough situation to kind of wrap your head around. There's no real obvious answer besides just do whatever you can to get these guys in positions to succeed. I mean, the amount of times where you kind of held your breath and wondered if a certain player was going to get hurt because his leg was getting rolled up on, or his ankle was getting rolled up on, because of the number of screens the Ravens had, or the number of times that Lamar was kind of trying to make things happen and having guys be in uncomfortable spots, was pretty pretty abnormal. But for the most part, the Ravens were able to breathe a sigh of relief and have guys come back to the huddle, or have guys come back to the sideline. And at a certain point, someone was going to get hurt. And credit to the Chiefs and to the Eagles that they were in positions where they could have as many guys as who started in week one be able to be present for the Super Bowl. I mean, they even got Brandon Graham back, for crying out loud. But yeah, I guess this is a lesson that I think you probably see a little bit differently than I do.
It's more a cry of frustration, I guess, of the timing of that injury, the severity of that
and
injury.
Your just deep-seated desire to go to New Orleans and party your ass off.
That's exactly right, Jonas. It was all led by personal desire to hit Bourbon Street. Jonas, we've gone far too long on this podcast already. At Jonas_Shaffer is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano, and at All Banner Sports, which will be populated by plenty of sights and sounds of spring training over the coming week. Jonas, care to hop on a flight down to Sarasota? Join me for some baseball. I know how much you love that sport.
Love baseball.
Love baseball. What do you think of the Orioles offseason so far? Didn't get that ace.
Didn't get that ace. They did not get that ace, as you said, and that's gonna be a problem, because in baseball, you need that ace.
You need that ace. I like
they got Grayson. They got Grayson.
Wow. All right.
Grayson's good.
Yeah. You think he could take that next step?
Yeah. If
take?
not two.
If not 2 steps forward. You really only can take 1 step on the mound, though, Jonas. You can't take 2 steps forward. Thanks so much for tuning in. Subscribe to the Banner Ravens podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google, SoundCloud, Spotify, all those good places. Watch us live on X and on YouTube each and every week. We are going to have much more content coming your way over the coming weeks as we get ready for free agency and the offseason in bulk. BaltimoreBanner.com is your place to find Jonas and Gianna and Kyle Goon and so much, much more coverage of the Baltimore Ravens. Subscribe $1 for 6 months. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano.
Don't miss the 2025 CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament in Baltimore, February 25th to March 1st at CFG Bank Arena. Watch HBCU teams battle to be crowned champion. Check out the free fan fest and performances at the Baltimore Convention Center. Enjoy downtown's top restaurants and stay in one of our amazing hotels. The CIAA Men's and Women's Basketball Tournament. You want to be here.
Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.